The moon remembers every promise, even after those who made it choose to forget. The great hall of Blackwood Pack shimmered beneath towering crystal lanterns, their warm light spilling across polished stone while wolves from every neighboring territory gathered for the most sacred ceremony of the season. Cedar branches decorated the ancient pillars, musicians filled the hall with a quiet melody, and the scent of fresh pine drifted through the open arches with the cool mountain breeze. Everything had been prepared to celebrate a bond believed to have been written long before either soul was born. Evelyn Carter stood before the moon altar wearing the simple ivory gown her late mother had sewn years earlier. The dress carried no jewels or symbols of noble blood, only careful stitches made with patient hands and unconditional love. She gently smoothed the fabric and lifted her eyes toward the alpha waiting across the hall. Damian Blackwood had once been the first person who made her believe she belonged somewhere. As children, they had raced through these forests together, climbed the same cliffs overlooking the valley, and carved their initials into an old cedar tree before promising that no matter what titles or responsibilities awaited them, they would never stop choosing each other. Even after Damian inherited leadership of Blackwood Pack, Evelyn never asked for power, influence, or status. She believed loyalty was enough to build a future. During the past several months, however, she had watched something quietly change. Damian became increasingly distant. Their conversations grew shorter. His smiles became polite instead of genuine. Whenever she asked whether something troubled him, he always offered the same answer. Everything will make sense soon. She wanted to believe him because love often chose patience before suspicion. Elder Magnus slowly stepped toward the moon altar and raised his weathered hands. The music faded. Every conversation disappeared. According to Blackwood tradition, Damian would cross the polished floor, take Evelyn's hand, and together they would complete the sacred vow beneath the blessing of the moon goddess. Evelyn watched him with quiet hope. Damian took one measured step forward, then another. He stopped halfway across the hall. His expression held neither anger nor uncertainty. It carried the calm certainty of someone who had made his decision long before this evening arrived. Slowly, he turned away from Evelyn. Confused whispers spread through the gathering. The future of Blackwood Pack demands a different path, Damian announced, his steady voice reaching every corner of the silent hall. Leadership requires choices beyond personal promises. I cannot honor a bond that no longer serves the future of this territory. Every word settled over the hall like the first snowfall of winter. Evelyn did not interrupt him. She searched his face for hesitation, regret, or even sadness. She found none. Damian walked past the moon altar and stopped beside a young noble she-wolf standing among several influential families. The woman lowered her eyes respectfully as he took his place beside her. No one applauded. No one celebrated. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument could have been. Elder Magnus looked toward Damian in stunned disbelief before turning to Evelyn, but she gently shook her head. She would not allow anyone to watch her dignity disappear with her future. Taking one slow breath, she quietly stepped away from the altar and walked toward the great entrance without looking back. Outside, the cool mountain air wrapped around her beneath a brilliant full moon. She paused only once in the empty courtyard, looking toward the hall where she had expected a new chapter of her life to begin. Instead of bitterness, she whispered softly into the night, "I hope one day you find the future you were searching for." Then she turned and followed the northern path leading away from the village. Inside the great hall, Elder Magnus remained motionless beside the altar. Something buried deep within his memory refused to stay silent. As a young boy, he had once heard his grandfather speak of ancient vows older than kingdoms themselves, promises that even time could not erase. The old wolf had warned him that if a sacred bond was ever abandoned through pride rather than necessity, the moon would answer in her own way, and every elder wise enough to listen would recognize the sign. Before Magnus could gather the scattered memories, every crystal lantern throughout the great hall flickered at exactly the same moment. Outside, the wind vanished. Wolves instinctively lifted their heads toward the distant northern mountains. From somewhere far beyond the endless forest came a single haunting howl unlike anything heard in generations. It carried no anger, no warning, and no hunger. It carried only an ancient authority that quietly stirred something forgotten inside every heart that heard it. Nearly a mile beyond the village, Evelyn stopped walking as the mysterious call echoed across the valley. She closed her eyes, and for reasons she could not explain, the loneliness inside her no longer felt quite as empty. It was as though someone she had never met had heard the promise that had just been broken, and somewhere beyond the silent forest, another promise had quietly begun. The ancient howl lingered over the valley long after its final note disappeared beyond the northern peaks. Inside the great hall, no one spoke. Even the musicians remained frozen, their hands still resting upon silent instruments as though they feared another sound might disturb whatever unseen presence had answered across the mountains. Elder Magnus slowly lifted his eyes toward the open arches, the color draining from his weathered face. Memories buried beneath decades of responsibility returned with startling clarity. His grandfather had once told him that the moon did not answer every broken heart. She answered only broken promises that altered the path of many lives. Damien was the first to break the silence. Drawing one measured breath, he turned toward the gathered wolves with the composure expected of an alpha. An unexpected sound does not change our future, he said firmly. Blackwood Pack has always relied on wisdom rather than fear. Tonight's ceremony is over. Tomorrow we continue building the future this territory deserves. Some wolves nodded politely, grateful for familiar confidence, but many exchanged uncertain glances. They had all heard the howl. More importantly, they had all seen the expression on Elder Magnus' face. Outside the great hall, Evelyn continued walking beneath the full moon, following the narrow northern trail without choosing a destination. She only knew she could not remain where every stone, every lantern, and every familiar voice reminded her of a future that no longer existed. The mountain air carried the scent of pine, mixed with the faint promise of approaching rain. As the distance between herself and the village slowly grew, the ache inside her chest changed in a way she had not expected. It remained painful, but it no longer felt confusing. Damien had finally answered the question she had been quietly asking herself for months. She had not lost the man she once loved that evening. She had realized he had already been gone long before the ceremony began. Nearly a mile beyond the village, the forest opened around an ancient stone marker covered with years of moss and climbing ivy. Evelyn remembered standing there as a little girl beside Damien after one of their childhood adventures. They had laughed while trying to read the weathered inscription carved into its surface, giving up before either of them could understand the faded words. Tonight she brushed away the moss with gentle fingers until the forgotten sentence slowly emerged beneath the moonlight. Only the forgotten may find what never abandoned them. She quietly repeated the words twice, allowing them to settle inside her. Somehow they no longer sounded mysterious. They sounded patient, as though they had been waiting years for someone to finally understand them. Most wolves walk past that stone their entire lives without ever truly seeing it. The gentle voice came from beneath the branches of an old oak tree standing a short distance beyond the marker. Evelyn turned and saw an elderly woman wrapped in a faded gray traveling cloak. Silver hair rested neatly over her shoulders, and calm green eyes reflected a quiet warmth that immediately eased the last traces of fear from Evelyn's heart. Nothing about the stranger felt threatening. If anything, she seemed as though she belonged to the forest as naturally as the ancient trees surrounding her. "Have we met before?" Evelyn asked politely. The elderly woman smiled with quiet amusement. "Not in this lifetime." The unusual answer should have sounded impossible, yet beneath the silent moonlit sky it somehow felt strangely comforting. The woman slowly walked to the stone marker and rested one weathered hand upon the ancient inscription. "Do you know why these words were carved here?" Evelyn gently shook her head. "Long ago," the woman began, "wolves believed the moon rewarded the strongest hearts. They spent generations competing for power, forgetting that strength without kindness eventually becomes another form of loneliness." She looked toward Evelyn with quiet understanding. The moon never searched for those who stood above everyone else. She always watched for those who still chose compassion when no one was watching. Evelyn lowered her eyes. After a long silence, the woman asked softly, "Tell me, child, what hurt the most tonight?" Evelyn considered the question carefully before answering. "Not losing Damien." She looked back toward the distant lights of Blackwood Pack, realizing I spent months trying to become someone he would choose instead of remaining the person I already was. The elderly woman's gentle smile deepened. Then your heart has already taken its first step home. Before Evelyn could ask what she meant, a cool breeze stirred the branches overhead. Something bright drifted slowly through the moonlight before settling beside the ancient stone. It was a single pale feather unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen. Its delicate surface reflected the moon with a soft silver glow that seemed almost alive. She carefully picked it up, expecting it to feel cool beneath her fingertips. Instead, gentle warmth spread through her hand before settling quietly beneath her heartbeat. The elderly woman watched without surprise. Every journey begins with a choice, she said. Not the choice someone makes for you, but the one only your own heart can make. Evelyn looked down as the feather released a tiny point of pale light that floated slowly toward the shadowed entrance of Silver Forest before disappearing among the ancient pines. She lifted her eyes to ask another question, but the old woman had already stepped back beneath the oak tree, smiling as though she knew the answer Evelyn had not yet learned to ask. Holding the feather gently against her palm, Evelyn turned toward the silent forest, feeling not as though she had been summoned by destiny, but as though she had finally noticed a path that had been quietly waiting for her all along. The pale feather rested gently in Evelyn's hand as she stood at the edge of Silver Forest, its quiet warmth spreading through her fingers with every heartbeat. For a brief moment, she looked back toward the distant lights of Blackwood Pack. Somewhere beyond those rooftops stood the great hall where she had expected to begin the next chapter of her life only hours earlier. Strangely, she no longer felt drawn back there. The questions that had haunted her throughout the past several months had already found their answers. Whatever waited ahead felt uncertain, yet uncertainty somehow seemed lighter than false hope. The tiny point of pale light drifted forward once more before disappearing between the towering pines. Evelyn followed without hesitation. The deeper she walked into Silver Forest, the quieter the world became. Thick carpets of pine needles softened every footstep, while moonlight filtered through ancient branches in long silver ribbons that danced gently across the forest floor. She expected the familiar sounds of hidden wildlife, yet no frightened birds took flight and no startled deer fled into the darkness. Instead, every living creature seemed perfectly at ease, as though the forest itself recognized her presence and found nothing to fear. Back beside the old stone marker, the elderly woman watched silently until Evelyn disappeared among the trees. She rested one hand upon the weathered inscription and smiled almost to herself before quietly continuing her own journey along the forgotten road. She never once looked back. Nearly half a mile into the forest, the narrow trail widened into a peaceful clearing where a crystal stream flowed between towering white birch trees older than any kingdom standing beyond the mountains. The water reflected the full moon with such perfect clarity that it seemed another sky rested beneath its gentle current. Evelyn paused beside the stream, overcome by a sense of peace she had not felt in many months. The feather in her hand grew noticeably warmer. A single point of pale light drifted from its delicate tip and floated slowly across the water before settling near the roots of the oldest birch tree in the clearing. As Evelyn followed it with her eyes, her breath caught. Standing beneath the ancient tree was an enormous silver wolf unlike anything she had ever imagined. His coat shimmered softly beneath the moonlight, every strand of fur carrying the quiet glow of polished silver rather than ordinary color. He stood taller than any alpha she had ever seen, yet there was nothing threatening in his posture. His calm gray eyes held neither suspicion nor dominance. Instead, they carried the quiet patience of someone who had watched countless seasons come and go. The great wolf simply observed her. Every lesson Evelyn had learned since childhood warned that an unknown wolf beyond pack territory should be feared. Yet nothing inside her urged her to run. The mysterious howl she had heard outside the village suddenly made perfect sense. It carried the same calm presence now standing silently before her. As her eyes slowly adjusted to the moonlit clearing, she noticed something lying beside the wolf's front leg. Half buried beneath fallen leaves rested an old iron restraint, its surface covered with rust from years of weather. One side had already split apart long ago, yet a fragment still lay loosely against the guardian's foreleg. Faint marks remained where cold iron had once pressed against silver fur. Evelyn felt an unexpected ache in her chest. She did not see a legend standing before her. She saw someone who had once carried a burden no living creature should have endured. Without taking another step toward the guardian, she quietly crossed the shallow stream and knelt beside the broken restraint instead. "Someone tried to keep you where you never belonged," she whispered gently. The great wolf remained perfectly still, watching every movement without fear. Evelyn carefully lifted the rusted fragment resting against the earth. It felt surprisingly heavy for something already broken. She looked at the worn iron for a long moment before quietly adding, "Whatever this once meant, it has no place here anymore." As she gently placed the broken fragment into the flowing stream, the old iron dissolved into fine gray dust before the current carried every trace of it away. The clearing answered immediately. A cool breeze moved through the ancient birch trees, carrying the scent of fresh rain and blooming wildflowers. Thousands of tiny silver lights awakened among the branches overhead, drifting peacefully through the night like distant stars. The great guardian slowly stepped forward until he stood only a few feet away. Evelyn remained kneeling, making no attempt to touch him. Instead, she simply met his calm gray eyes. After a long moment, the magnificent wolf slowly lowered his head before her in silent acknowledgement. It was not the gesture of a ruler honoring a subject. It was the gratitude of one soul recognizing another. At that instant, the weight Evelyn had carried since leaving the great hall quietly disappeared. She had spent months wondering whether she had not been enough. Standing beneath the ancient birch trees, she finally understood that true worth had never depended on being chosen by someone who no longer saw her heart. A gentle splash from the stream drew her attention for only a heartbeat. When she looked back, the guardian was gone. Fresh silver paw prints crossed the moonlit grass before disappearing deeper into the forest. Then, from somewhere beyond the ancient birches, a calm masculine voice drifted through the quiet night. "Most people spend their lives searching for someone willing to choose them. Tonight, you chose compassion first. That is why the forest opened its heart to you." The calm voice drifted through the clearing with effortless certainty, carrying neither surprise nor command, but the quiet confidence of someone who had waited a very long time for this exact moment. Evelyn slowly rose from the stream and turned toward the ancient birch trees where the words had come from. A tall man stepped into the moonlight, emerging between the white trunks with measured footsteps that barely disturbed the forest floor. He wore a simple, dark traveling cloak fastened at one shoulder, and loose strands of silver hair reflected the pale light filtering through the branches above. Nothing about his clothing suggested royalty or power, yet the calm dignity surrounding him made the entire clearing feel somehow complete. Before she could understand why, Evelyn's eyes found his. They were the same quiet gray she had just seen in the guardian's gaze. Neither of them spoke immediately. The silence between them felt peaceful rather than uncertain, filled only by the gentle murmur of the crystal stream flowing beside them. Evelyn looked toward the fresh silver paw prints leading deeper into the forest before meeting the stranger's eyes once again. "Who are you?" she asked softly. A faint smile appeared across his face. "My name is Lucian." He remained where he was, allowing the distance between them to be her choice rather than his. Evelyn studied him carefully. "Did you see the guardian?" Lucian followed her gaze toward the empty clearing before answering. "I saw someone set down a burden she never deserved to carry." Evelyn looked back at the stream where the broken restraint had dissolved only moments earlier. "I did not do anything extraordinary." "No," Lucian agreed gently. "You simply chose kindness when no one expected you to. That is far rarer." His answer lingered quietly between them. Evelyn had spent so much of her life believing kindness should never be noticed that hearing someone describe it as something precious felt unfamiliar. She looked down at the pale feather still resting in her hand. The woman near the stone marker said the moon searches for hearts, not titles. Lucian's expression softened with quiet recognition. She remembers the old paths better than most. Evelyn lifted her eyes. Who was she? Lucian was silent for a moment before answering. Some travelers spend their lives searching for names. Others simply accept the gift they were given. He offered nothing more, and somehow Evelyn sensed he was protecting a mystery rather than avoiding a question. She chose not to press him further. Instead, she looked around the clearing. This forest feels different from anywhere I have ever been. Lucian slowly walked to the edge of the crystal stream. Kneeling beside the water, he touched its surface with 2 fingers. Gentle ripples spread across the moon's reflection before fading naturally into stillness. Silver Forest does not welcome every traveler, he said. It listens before it opens its paths. Most wolves enter looking for answers. Very few arrive willing to leave something behind. Evelyn quietly considered his words. And what did I leave behind? Lucian looked at her with calm certainty. The belief that another person must decide your worth. She lowered her eyes. For the first time since leaving the Great Hall, she realized the tightness inside her chest had truly disappeared. Damien had not taken her future away. He had only revealed that she had been searching for it in the wrong place. Lucian reached beneath his cloak and carefully removed a small crescent-shaped pendant carved from smooth white stone. Delicate silver veins shimmered beneath its polished surface whenever moonlight touched it. Instead of placing it directly into her hand, he rested it upon a flat stone beside the stream. If your heart tells you to leave it here, he said gently, then leave it here. Gifts accepted out of obligation become burdens. Only those accepted freely become blessings. Evelyn looked at the pendant for several quiet moments. Nothing compelled her to pick it up. There was no voice in her mind, no mysterious force drawing her forward. She simply felt the same peaceful certainty she had experienced when she chose to lift the broken restraint. Slowly she reached down and picked up the pendant. The smooth stone felt pleasantly warm beneath her fingertips, and a quiet wave of comfort settled beneath her heartbeat. Lucian smiled, not because she had accepted his gift, but because she had made her own choice. It recognizes you, he said softly. Evelyn looked at the pendant with quiet curiosity. Recognizes me? Recognition is not the same as choosing, Lucian replied. The moon does not create. Goodness. She reveals what has always been there. Before Evelyn could ask another question, distant voices echoed faintly through the forest. Several wolves from Blackwood Pack were calling her name somewhere beyond the trees. Elder Magnus had begun searching for her. Lucian listened quietly before looking back toward Evelyn. They came because they care whether you return. Evelyn slipped the pendant safely beneath her cloak. Will I see you again? Lucian's smile remained gentle. You will not need to search for the path a second time. Once Silver Forest recognizes a kind heart, it never truly forgets it. The voices grew closer. Evelyn turned instinctively toward the sound. When she looked back only a moment later, Lucian had already begun walking deeper into the forest. He did not disappear into mist or moonlight. He simply followed a narrow trail hidden among the ancient birch trees until the forest quietly welcomed him beyond her sight, leaving behind only the soft sound of flowing water and the comforting certainty that this meeting had not been an ending, but the beginning of something far older than either of them, yet somehow deeply personal to them both. The voices calling Evelyn's name grew clearer as she followed the narrow forest trail back toward the old stone marker. The warmth of the crescent pendant rested quietly against her heart with every step, neither growing brighter nor fading away, but remaining as calm and steady as the feeling now settling inside her. When she reached the ancient stone, several lanterns appeared between the trees. Elder Magnus emerged first, relief softening the lines across his weathered face the moment he saw her. Thank the moon, he said with a quiet breath. We feared you had wandered deeper into the northern forest than anyone could safely follow. Evelyn offered him a reassuring smile. I am all right. The elder studied her carefully. He expected to find heartbreak lingering in her eyes after the ceremony. Yet instead, he found something entirely different. The sadness had not disappeared, but it no longer seemed to define her. It had been replaced by a quiet confidence that had not been there only hours earlier. As they began walking back toward the village together, Magnus noticed the pale feather resting gently in her hand. He did not ask where it had come from. Some questions, he knew, would answer themselves when the proper season arrived. Dawn slowly touched the eastern mountains as they returned to Blackwood Pack. The familiar valley looked peaceful at first glance, but careful eyes soon recognized subtle changes. Farmers standing beside the western fields quietly pointed toward rows of wheat that had bent in a single direction overnight, although no strong wind had passed through the valley. At the northern spring, clear water still flowed between the ancient stones, but the current had noticeably weakened. Hunters returning from the eastern woods reported that deer, elk, and mountain goats had all moved unexpectedly toward the higher ridges before sunrise, abandoning familiar feeding grounds without any obvious reason. By the time Evelyn reached the village square, messengers had begun arriving from neighboring watch posts carrying similar reports. One described unusual silence spreading across parts of the forest where birds normally greeted every morning. Another spoke of ancient oak trees shedding leaves weeks earlier than expected. A third quietly admitted that several border scouts had witnessed enormous pale wolves standing motionless upon the northern mountain ridges before dawn. They never crossed into Blackwood territory. They simply watched the valley until sunrise before disappearing into the mist. Damian Blackwood stood at the center of the gathering beside a large wooden table covered with maps of the surrounding territory. Unlike the confidence he displayed the previous evening, he now listened carefully to every report before asking precise questions. Did every patrol observe the same direction of movement? He asked one scout. Yes, Alpha. Everything seems to be moving north. Damian turned to another messenger. In the spring, the water has not stopped flowing, the messenger replied. But every elder says they have never seen it this quiet. Damian remained silent for a long moment, comparing each account against the other's spread. Across the maps, whatever was happening no longer resembled isolated coincidence. When Elder Magnus quietly joined him, Damian looked toward the older wolf. Have our records ever mentioned anything like this? Magnus hesitated before answering honestly. Not within living memory. He looked toward the distant northern mountains. Only the oldest forgotten stories speak of guardians watching the valley from those ridges. Damian folded his arms thoughtfully. Stories are not evidence. Yet even as he spoke, his eyes remained fixed upon the horizon. He had heard the ancient howl. He had seen respected elders grow uneasy. Part of him still searched for ordinary explanations. Another part had quietly begun wondering whether ordinary explanations would be enough. Evelyn observed the gathering from the edge of the square without interrupting. Beneath her cloak, the pendant rested peacefully against her heart. As another messenger mentioned the northern mountains, it grew slightly warmer before returning to its gentle calm. She noticed the change, but kept it to herself. That afternoon, seeking a place where she could think without the growing noise surrounding the village, Evelyn walked to the old maple tree overlooking the western meadow where she had often escaped as a child. Sitting beneath its broad branches, she removed the pendant and held it toward the afternoon sunlight. Fine silver lines slowly appeared across its smooth surface, weaving together into the shape of rivers flowing toward a distant mountain peak. She traced the delicate pattern with one fingertip, wondering whether it had always been hidden there or whether something inside it had truly awakened. Calm footsteps rustled softly through the tall grass behind her. Evelyn turned and found Lucian standing beneath the shade of the maple tree, his expression carrying the same quiet warmth she remembered from the forest clearing. His eyes briefly rested upon the pendant before returning to hers. It has begun remembering, he said gently. Evelyn looked from the pendant back to him. What is it remembering? Lucian lifted his gaze toward the distant northern mountains where the afternoon light rested upon. The silent ridges. Not what it is, he answered softly. Who it has been waiting to recognize. Lucian's quiet words lingered in the afternoon air as Evelyn looked from the pendant in her hand toward the distant northern mountains. Who it has been waiting to recognize, she repeated softly. I still do not understand. Lucian smiled with quiet patience. Understanding rarely arrives before its proper time. If it did, faith would never be necessary. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the delicate silver lines now resting across the pendant's surface. They no longer moved, yet the image of winding rivers leading toward a distant mountain remained clear. Yesterday, I believed my future had ended, she admitted. Today it feels as though I have stepped into a story that began long before I was born. Lucian looked across the peaceful valley below. Sometimes the hardest part of any journey is realizing it did not begin with us. Before Evelyn could ask another question, hurried footsteps climbed the hillside. Elder Magnus appeared moments later carrying a weathered leather satchel pressed carefully beneath one arm. Though slightly out of breath, his eyes carried an excitement Evelyn had never seen before. Miss Carter, he called, stopping beneath the old maple tree. I believe I finally found what my grandfather tried to teach me. He carefully opened the satchel and removed an ancient parchment whose edges had darkened with age. Faded lunar symbols surrounded an illustration of a magnificent silver guardian standing beside a young woman beneath a crescent moon. Unlike the stories told around winter fires, this parchment read more like a record than a legend. Magnus gently unfolded the final section before reading aloud. When a sacred promise is abandoned through pride instead of necessity, the guardian shall not choose another heart. He shall recognize the one already known to the moon. Evelyn slowly looked toward Lucian. Recognize. Lucian nodded gently. That single word has been misunderstood for generations. Elder Magnus lowered the parchment slightly. Our ancestors believed the guardian selected someone worthy. Lucian shook his head. No guardian grants worth. No alpha grants worth. No prophecy creates worth. The moon simply reveals what has quietly existed all along. Evelyn remembered kneeling beside the broken restraint instead of reaching for the legendary wolf. She had not acted because she expected a reward. She had simply seen someone carrying pain and chosen compassion before curiosity. For the first time since leaving the Great Hall, she understood why that moment mattered. It had never been a test. It had simply revealed who she already was. As the realization settled quietly within her, the pendant resting in her hand grew noticeably warmer. Fine streams of pale light slowly spread across its smooth surface before extending gently over the inside of her wrist. Elder Magnus stepped back in astonishment as a graceful crescent-shaped mark appeared beneath Evelyn's skin, glowing softly before settling into a delicate silver outline. She felt no pain, only a deep and peaceful certainty unlike anything she had ever experienced. At that exact moment, a long, harmonious howl echoed across the valley. Evelyn instinctively looked toward the northern mountains. Four enormous silver guardians stood upon separate ridges overlooking Blackwood Valley, their luminous coats shining beneath the afternoon sun. They remained perfectly still, yet their voices rose together in a single ancient chorus that rolled across every forest, river, and hillside surrounding the territory. This time the sound carried no mystery. It carried recognition. Throughout the valley, wolves stopped whatever they were doing and lifted their heads toward the mountains. Farmers left their fields. Hunters lowered their bows. Children looked toward the northern sky with quiet wonder. Even the birds resting among the pines fell silent as the final echoes drifted through the wind. In the village square, Damien stepped out from the council hall just as the ancient chorus reached Blackwood Pack. He stood motionless, listening until the final note disappeared into the distance. Around him, every messenger who had reported strange events earlier that morning now watched the mountains in stunned silence. Damien slowly turned toward Elder Rowan, the oldest council member still standing beside him. "Prepare the Great Hall," he said calmly. "Send riders to every neighboring territory. Invite every alpha and every elder willing to come." Rowan looked at him in surprise. "Do you believe the old stories now?" Damien remained silent for a long moment before answering honestly. "I believe something greater than disbelief is asking us to listen." He looked once more toward the northern ridges where the last traces of silver light still lingered above the mountains. "Tomorrow evening," he continued, "Blackwood Pack will hold a full assembly. Whatever truth has awakened in this valley, every pack deserves to witness it together." As the afternoon breeze gently stirred the branches above the maple tree, Lucian quietly watched the distant village without speaking. Beside him, Evelyn slipped the pendant safely beneath her cloak. Neither of them realized that the gathering Damien had just called would become the moment an ancient promise, patiently waiting across countless generations, would finally be remembered by the entire valley. The following evening, the Great Hall of Blackwood Pack filled long before sunset. Messengers from neighboring territories had traveled through the night after Damien's invitation reached every council across the valley. Elders, alphas, healers, and historians gathered beneath the towering crystal lanterns, not because they all believed the ancient stories, but because every one of them had witnessed the same unsettling changes. Rivers had slowed. Forests had fallen strangely silent. For silver guardians continued standing upon the northern ridges without moving, watching the valley with patient certainty. No one could explain it. Damien stood before the moon altar wearing the ceremonial black robes of Blackwood's Alpha. The confidence that had once defined him had been replaced by something quieter. Throughout the previous day, he had questioned every scout, compared every report, and searched every practical explanation he could imagine. None of them fully accounted for what the valley was becoming. For the first time since inheriting leadership, he accepted that wisdom sometimes began where certainty ended. Elder Magnus stood a few steps away, the ancient parchment carefully rolled beneath one arm. He had shown its contents only to a handful of elders who had spent the entire afternoon comparing forgotten records preserved across neighboring packs. None of the surviving texts contradicted one another. Though separated by generations, they all repeated the same forgotten truth. The Guardian did not choose worth. He revealed it. Evelyn quietly entered the great hall and stood near the back of the gathering. She had not come expecting recognition or answers. She came because this valley was still her home, and because every wolf, regardless of rank or sorrow, had been invited to witness whatever truth awaited them. Beneath her cloak, the crescent pendant rested peacefully against her heart. The silver mark upon her wrist remained hidden beneath her sleeve, known only to herself, Lucian, and Elder Magnus. She noticed Damien briefly glance toward her across the crowded hall. There was no bitterness in his expression now, only the quiet weight carried by someone beginning to understand the consequences of his own choices. Before he could address the gathering, the great wooden doors at the far end of the hall slowly opened. No servant touched them. A cool mountain breeze entered first, carrying the familiar scent of pine, fresh rain, and distant cedar. The ceremonial flame beside the moon altar flickered once before becoming perfectly still. Every conversation disappeared. Lucian stepped calmly through the entrance wearing the same simple traveling cloak Evelyn had seen in Silver Forest. He carried no weapon, no royal emblem, and no visible sign of authority. Yet the atmosphere within the hall shifted the moment he crossed the threshold. Guards instinctively stepped aside without being ordered. Visiting alphas quietly lowered their voices. Even wolves who had never met him felt an unexplainable urge to watch in respectful silence. Damien remained where he stood, meeting the stranger's calm gaze without hostility. "You have walked through my territory more than once," he said evenly. "If you have come to speak, then speak openly before every pack. Gathered here. Who are you?" Lucian stopped several steps before the moon altar. His voice remained calm, carrying effortlessly through the silent hall. "Names matter less than the promises they serve." The answer puzzled many in the gathering, but Elder Magnus slowly closed his eyes. He had read almost those exact words only hours earlier upon the ancient parchment. Damien took one slow breath. This time he did not interrupt. He simply waited. Lucian turned his attention toward Evelyn. Their eyes met across the hall, and at that same instant the pendant beneath her cloak grew gently warm. A soft silver glow shone through the fabric before delicate streams of pale light slowly circled around her feet. Quiet gasps spread throughout the gathering. Evelyn neither stepped forward nor reached toward the light. She simply remained where she was, calm and unafraid. Elder Magnus carefully unrolled the ancient parchment. "Listen well," he said, his steady voice carrying across the great hall. "For generations we believed these words described a future event. We were wrong. They describe a truth waiting to be recognized." He read aloud. "When compassion walks where pride has broken sacred trust, the guardian shall bow not to power, nor to title, but to the heart the moon has never ceased remembering." Before the final words had fully settled over the hall, the ancient howl echoed directly above the great hall. Every crystal lantern shimmered. Pale moonlight poured through the circular opening high above the altar, surrounding Lucian in a quiet column of silver radiance. The light grew steadily brighter, not blinding but impossibly pure. No one moved. No one spoke. As the brilliance slowly softened, the human figure standing within it was no longer alone. The magnificent silver guardian stood proudly beneath the moon's blessing, his luminous eyes calm and unwavering as he looked not toward the assembled leaders, but toward Evelyn, while every elder in the hall silently realized they were witnessing a promise their ancestors had remembered for centuries and misunderstood until this very moment. The great hall remained perfectly still beneath the quiet column of silver light. Every wolf present seemed to forget how to breathe as the magnificent guardian stood before the moon altar, his luminous coat reflecting the moon's blessing with calm radiance rather than overwhelming brilliance. His presence carried no threat and demanded no submission. Instead, an indescribable peace settled over the gathering, as though every ancient story they had ever questioned had suddenly become something living before their eyes. Elder Magnus was the first to lower himself onto one knee. Tears quietly filled his eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of finally witnessing the truth his grandfather had spent a lifetime protecting. One by one, the visiting elders followed. Soon the neighboring alphas bowed their heads as well. Around the great hall, every wolf chose reverence over uncertainty. Only Damien remained standing, not from pride, but because astonishment had rooted him to the polished stone beneath his feet. He looked from the guardian to the ancient parchment resting in Elder Magnus' hands. Every strange report, every unanswered question, every impossible event that had unfolded since the ceremony suddenly became part of a single story he had failed to recognize. The prophecy had not returned because wolves believed in it. It had remained true whether anyone believed it or not. Slowly, the guardian turned toward Evelyn. The moment his calm gray eyes met hers, the crescent pendant beneath her cloak answered with a gentle warmth. Soft silver light spread through the fabric before the graceful mark hidden beneath her sleeve awakened once again. Delicate streams of pale radiance drifted upward, circling around her with quiet elegance like ribbons carried upon a gentle breeze. Evelyn neither reached toward the light nor stepped away from it. She simply stood where she was, her expression peaceful, allowing the moment to unfold without trying to control it. The guardian began walking toward her. Each measured step echoed softly through the silent hall until he finally stopped before her. For a long moment, the magnificent silver wolf simply looked into her eyes. Then, exactly as he had done beside the crystal stream deep within Silver Forest, he slowly lowered his head. A quiet breath escaped the gathering. Elder Magnus closed his eyes before speaking the final line written upon the ancient parchment. The guardian bows only to the heart the moon has never ceased remembering. Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence that comes when every question finally finds its answer. Damien lowered his eyes. At last he understood what he had failed to see. Leadership had taught him to measure strength, influence, and alliances. The moon had been measuring something entirely different. Outside the great hall, the four silver guardians standing upon the northern ridges gently lifted their heads. Their voices rose together in one harmonious chorus that rolled across the forests, rivers, and mountains surrounding Blackwood Valley. This time the sound carried no mystery. It carried welcome. At that very moment, clear water surged once more through the ancient northern spring. Birds returned to the towering pines that had stood silent only hours before. Fresh leaves stirred gently across the oldest oak trees, although no wind touched the valley. The land itself seemed to release a long-held breath. Within the great hall, the silver radiance surrounding the guardian slowly softened. Tiny points of pale light drifted upward through the open ceiling until the brilliant form standing before Evelyn gradually became human once more. Lucian stood where the guardian had been, his calm gray eyes carrying the same quiet warmth she had first seen beside the forest stream. He looked first toward the gathered wolves before finally meeting Evelyn's eyes. "I did not come to choose anyone," he said gently. "Choice belongs to every heart. I came only because the moon asked that what had always been true should no longer remain hidden." He turned toward the assembled leaders. "Power may build kingdoms. Titles may preserve them for a season. But only compassion allows them to endure." No one challenged his words. They no longer sounded like a lesson. They sounded like something every heart present had quietly known but forgotten. Evelyn felt the last trace of sorrow she had carried since the ceremony finally disappeared. She realized that losing Damien had never been the greatest turning point of her life. The true turning point had come the moment she chose compassion beside the crystal stream without expecting anyone to witness it. Only then did she understand the words carved into the ancient stone marker. Some promises are never lost. They simply wait until the heart is ready to recognize what has been walking beside it all along. The first light of dawn spread gently across Blackwood Valley, bathing the forests and mountain ridges in soft gold as though the land itself had awakened from a long and patient sleep. By sunrise, The changes could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. The northern spring flowed with quiet strength once again, filling the ancient stone channels with crystal-clear water. Birds returned to the towering pines, their songs echoing across the valley where silence had lingered only a day before. Fresh green leaves shimmered upon branches that had seemed weary, and fields that had bowed beneath an unseen burden now stood tall beneath the morning breeze. Wolves from every neighboring territory remained gathered outside the great hall, not to celebrate a victory, but to witness the beginning of something greater than any single pack. Elder Magnus slowly stepped onto the ancient stone platform before the assembled wolves. The weathered parchment rested carefully in his hands, no longer hidden within forgotten archives, but carried openly beneath the morning sun. He looked across the countless faces before him before speaking with quiet conviction. For generations, we believed this prophecy promised that one extraordinary day the moon would change the world. We misunderstood it. He gently raised the parchment. The moon did not change the world. She reminded us what kind of hearts have always been capable of changing it. No voice challenged him. No elder questioned his words. They had all witnessed the guardian bow before compassion rather than authority. Damian Blackwood quietly stepped forward until he stood before Evelyn. He wore no ceremonial robe now, only the simple clothing of an ordinary wolf. For the first time since becoming alpha, he spoke without the protection of rank or tradition. Lowering his head respectfully, he met her eyes. I believed leadership meant choosing what appeared strongest for the future, he admitted honestly. Somewhere along the way I forgot that trust is the first promise every leader makes. I cannot change what I chose, but I will spend the rest of my life becoming worthy of the wolves who still place their faith in me. Evelyn looked at him with calm understanding. The pain he had caused had been real, yet it no longer held power over her future. The future you were searching for was never mine to lose, she answered gently. I truly hope you build one worthy of those who continue walking beside you. Damian nodded quietly. He understood that forgiveness did not always restore what had been broken, yet grace could still become the beginning of someone better than the person who had caused the hurt. Without another word, he stepped aside. Lucian walked toward Evelyn through the gathered wolves with the same calm presence that had first welcomed her beside the crystal stream. Stopping before her, he placed one hand over his heart before gently bowing his head, not as a ruler honoring a queen, but as one soul recognizing another. The moon never led you here because you were extraordinary, he said softly. She led you here because when disappointment invited bitterness, you chose compassion instead. Evelyn smiled, remembering the frightened young woman who had walked away from the great hall, believing her story had ended. Looking back now, she realized the most important moment of her life had not been when the guardian bowed before her. It had been when she quietly removed a broken restraint from someone she believed would never know her name. Together, she and Lucian walked towards Silver Forest beneath the gentle morning sky. Before entering the ancient trees, Evelyn paused beside the old stone marker where everything had quietly begun. The weathered words remained carved into its surface exactly as before. Only the forgotten may find what never abandoned them. She rested her fingertips lightly against the ancient inscription and smiled. At last, she understood. Destiny had never abandoned her. She had simply been looking for it in the wrong place until her own heart showed her the path home. As she stepped away from the stone, the pale feather she had carried since that first meeting beside the marker slowly lifted from her hand. It drifted upward on a gentle breeze before dissolving into countless tiny points of silver light that disappeared into the morning sky. Its purpose had been fulfilled. Beneath her cloak, the crescent pendant resting above her heart grew peacefully still. It no longer shimmered with hidden light because it no longer needed to guide her. The path it had recognized was now the path she walked by choice. Years later, travelers crossing the northern mountains often spoke of a peaceful valley where wolves from many territories gathered beneath every full moon without fear or rivalry. They spoke of an ancient stone standing beside the northern road, its weathered inscription quietly reminding every passerby that the heart is sometimes the last place we learn to search. Some travelers also claimed that, on quiet evenings when moonlight rested upon the forgotten trail, An elderly woman in a faded gray cloak could still be seen waiting beneath the old oak tree with a gentle smile for those willing to slow their steps long enough to read the ancient words. Whether she was merely a traveler or something far older, no one could ever say. And high above the valley, beyond the northern ridges where the morning mist embraced the mountains, another magnificent silver guardian slowly opened his eyes as a single pale feather settled beside the forgotten stone before dissolving into light. He watched the peaceful valley below for one silent moment before quietly lifting his gaze toward the rising moon that still lingered beyond the dawn. The valley had found peace, but the moon had never stopped watching. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts, like, share, subscribe, enable notifications, and join us for more unforgettable alpha romance stories ahead.